In the morning, every morning, I simply have to have my coffee. I just gotta have coffee. I love coffee. It wakes me up. It gets me going. It helps me do amazing things. Coffee is a blessing. I don't care what I had to go through. I would get coffee. I don't care if I had to grow it from the bean, watch it grow and water it every day. If I have to do more stuff, if I had to pay more, if I have to pay double, triple, quadruple the price, I don't care because I have to have my caffeine and I love coffee. There are some things in this life we don't care what's in our way, we have to have it. And I think this drives at an economics concept called elasticity. Elasticity. Some goods you have to have. You don't care what the price is. If the price goes up, oh, well that sucks. I guess I have to pay more, but I have to have it. Other goods, the price goes up just a little bit, you might decide against it. You might pick something else instead. You might change your mind. You might see what other options are on the table. We call these elastic goods, elastic demand. We call it this good you have to have inelastic demand. So let's hop in, let's look at some graphs, and let's see if we can't figure out elasticities. So here we are looking at elastic demand, unitary elastic demand, and inelastic demand. So that cup of coffee I'm talking about, this important medicine that you have to have, right? Or your cup of coffee. This is going to be very inelastic demand, right? Very inelastic demand. No matter how much price changes, right? Price can go either way. The amount that you want doesn't really change that much, kind of just going back and forth between a small subset of the possible quantities, right? So price can fluctuate a whole lot, but the amount we want isn't going to change a whole lot, right? It's inelastic demand. Our nice little mnemonic for this, inelastic demand looks like an I. So it's up and down. It looks like the letter I, right? Very vertical line representing how changes in price don't change quantity very much, right? That night on the town or that kind of fancy meal, maybe price doesn't change so much. Maybe we only change price a little bit and people will buy much less, right? Much less. So this line is flat because a small change in price can lead to a significant change in the amount that we want to buy, right? The quantity demanded. And I've got an example here of that nice restaurant, right? Maybe a date's worth $30 and not worth $40. No, I'm just kidding. Don't tell my wife I said that. But you get the idea, right? Some goods we respond to changes in price and some goods we don't. This example in the middle, unitary elastic, this is referring to like a one-to-one trade-off. So as price increases by 1%, quantity demanded decreases by 1%. So maybe it's a little harder to think of a good that has that very specific situation, but elastic demand and inelastic demand are both going to be very common, very important concepts, and we'll kind of go through. So what kinds of things are going to make demand elastic or inelastic? Well, I've got some questions that are going to help us. I wanted to hop in and put some real quick mathematics behind this problem. If you'll take a peek here, our formula for price elasticity of demand, percent change in quantity demanded over percent change in price. Okay, that should make pretty good sense, right? We just want to know how responsive quantity demanded is to a change in price. So we put the thing that we're interested in on top over the thing that we think might have an effect on it. We want to find that relative responsiveness. So we use these numbers for that. And this table kind of explains the different possible outcomes for this equation. I'll post another video in the description below, kind of fleshing this out, showing another formula as well. And of course, use your ManQ text to stay on top of things as well. So what makes demand elastic or inelastic? Well, our first question is what we talked about with the cup of coffee or the important medicine or food or water or clothes or a place to stay. Is the good a necessity or a luxury? If the price of a trip to the doctor doubled, you'd probably still go to the doctor, right? You got to go to the doctor no matter what the price is. But if the price of a sailboat doubles, potentially not going to be as important for you to buy it if it's twice as expensive, right? So that's our first question. Is the good a necessity or a luxury? Next up, are there close substitutes? Is there something we can switch to? So you can think of butter, right? Butter is a great example of this. If the price of butter went way up and it became way more expensive to buy butter, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Well, you're probably going to buy less butter and buy more oil, buy more margarine, use substitutes, similar products that you can use instead, and take advantage of the fact that maybe prices haven't gone up in those other goods, right? All right. I think a counterexample of this would be eggs, right? There's not a lot of good substitutes for eggs. Maybe there's some kind of protein you could get, but eggs are really a unique thing, and potentially maybe you switch from duck egg to chicken egg or vice versa, kind of thing like that. But broadly, I think there's not a lot of close substitutes for eggs, so it's going to be relatively more inelastic because of that, less responsive to price changes. We're going to need to look at how is the market defined? How is the market defined? So if we define our market as food, well, food is a necessity. There's no close substitutes for food. Defining our market broadly as food is going to lead to a very inelastic understanding of food, of the market for food. But if we redefine it more specifically, say apples or pretzel rods or ice cream, well, defining the market more specifically, pretzel rods might be a luxury. There might be close substitutes like chips and whatever, peanuts, and ice cream. If we define it even more specifically than that, we're talking about a specific flavor or a specific brand. This is definitely just honing in and adding more substitutes, considering it even more of a luxury, right? So it's going to become more elastic the more specific of a market we're talking about, usually. And last but not least, how much time do we have to make a decision? I think the perfect example of this is your car. So all throughout college and to some extent even today, I haven't driven a very nice car. Now, I like my car and it rolls me down the road. That's what I need it for, right? Need it to get around. Don't need a real fancy car. But if my transmission went out, and in this hypothetical, my car was worth $1,000 and it's $2,000 to fix it, I'm not going to pay $2,000 to fix a $1,000 car. I'd take that $2,000 and instead spend it to just get a car, get a better car, right? So I go to the car dealership or the used car lot and I say, well, I've got this amount of money and I can trade in this broken car and I need to buy it today. And they're gonna say, oh, you need to buy it today? You need it today. Oh, you need to pick one of these to have by the time you leave this lot. Well, Actually, all those sticker prices are set. I'm not going to haggle with you at all. And they're really going to rip you off, because if you lose that power to walk away, you need it right away. You lose a lot of ability to bargain, bargaining power, bargaining strength, because you have such a limited time horizon. You don't have very much time to make your decision. So these are the kinds of things that will cause goods to be elastic versus inelastic, right? The less time you have, the more inelastic. The more time you have, the more elastic. So yeah, moving forward, it's not just demand elasticity. We also have price elasticity of supply. So these graphs here show how for some goods, in response to price changes, quantity does not change very much. Obviously, we're still following the law of supply, which states that as price increases, quantity demanded will also increase. In both these examples, that's the case, right? But as price increases over here, where it's elastic, quantity supplied is increasing much more than where it's inelastic. So again, our inelastic looks like an I. It's straight up and down, right? Or relatively more straight up and down than this elastic curve, right? And this is showing that some suppliers aren't responsive to price changes. Well, I know what you're thinking. Well, what kind of stuff are you talking about? Because that doesn't really make sense. Well, I think we could picture a relatively inelastic supplier might be a farmer, right? They have a set amount of land, they have a set amount of tools, a set amount of ability to create goods every year, right? To grow their crops every year. A relatively elastic, responsive to price changes good might be medicine, right? So pharmaceutical companies, once they've figured out how to make a specific drug, once they know the chemical formula of it, making one more pill is usually going to be pretty easy. Just adding one additional pill is going to be a pretty cheap addition for them, right? So that's a relatively elastic supply curve. So I know what you're thinking. We've gone through these different curves. Now you understand the basic ideas of elasticity, specifically price elasticity of demand and price elasticity of supply. But why do they matter? Well, I've got a few different examples that are going to show us exactly why they matter. So let's go forward. So let's say we have a farmer, right? So our supply curve, pretty far up and down. So this is going to be inelastic supply, right? Like we said in our last slide, farmers kind of have a set amount of land to deal with. So they're going to have a set amount of crops, more or less. Our demand is also pretty inelastic, right? Pretty up and down, pretty vertical line, because people want more or less a set amount of wheat. And to some extent they could switch to corn or a different grain, but usually we have a set amount of wheat that we want, right? So my question to you based on this market is, could a good year for crops, where there's good temperature, good weather, and a farmer is able to make more crops than usual, be a bad year for his farm altogether? A bad year in a money sense for him? Well, let's look at it, right? So we've got a shift, right? We got to follow our 3 steps. So our market event is this really good year that allows us to produce more stuff, right? Really good year allows us to grow more wheat, okay? So first step is this supply or demand. Well, I think it's definitely a shift in supply, right? We're able to produce more. And since we can produce more, it's a shift in supply to the right. So we're shifting to the right. So let's take a look at what that might look like. So now our farmer is able to produce more at a lower price because supply has shifted rightward, and our equilibrium price and quantity have changed. Equilibrium price has fallen from 3 to 2, and equilibrium quantity has increased from 100 to 110. So could a good year for farmers be a bad, I apologize, could a good year for crops be a bad year for farmers? Yeah, it can. Let me prove it to you. How do we calculate total revenue? Well, what I mean when I say total revenue is the amount of money that a company brings in, the amount of money a company brings in. So essentially, we're talking about sales, right? And we're not taking out any kind of cost or what they spend on their workers or their factories, anything like that. We're just talking about the amount of money they bring in. No cost adjusting, okay? So in economics, we can consider that simply price times quantity. So over here on the left, I've added these price times quantity formulas. So before the shift, our original equilibrium, selling at a price of 3, selling 100 quantity, 100 bushels of wheat, our total revenue was $300. After the shift, selling at a price of 2 and a quantity of 110, our new total revenue is $220. A farmer can have a record year where they sell more, they grow more than they've ever grown before, and they have a record year, and they can still go bankrupt because everybody else was having that same record year and the price fell so much. Total revenue for this farm in this market has gone down. Crazy, right? It's gone down because of this inelastic demand. I got one more example for you of why elasticity matters. So let's dive in. Look at that, the market for illegal drugs. The way I have it drawn here, we have pretty inelastic demand. This should make good sense, right? Are people who are addicted to drugs very responsive to changes in price? If the price of meth or heroin goes up a little bit, do they say, oh man, I was addicted to meth or heroin, but now the price has gone up another $1, I just can't pay that anymore? Of course not, right? These people have problems, they need some kind of help potentially. Just a change in price is not going to get them to not do drugs, right? Not very responsive to price changes. I would argue supply, or producers of illegal drugs, is actually going to be pretty responsive to price changes. The higher the price, the more effort they'll put into creating and distributing drugs. So we as a country have two different strategies for how to deal with our potential problems with illegal drugs, right? And let me show you what those two different strategies look like. On the left, we have incarceration. So since the 90s and even before that, we've had a drug war, right? We've had a goal of putting drug dealers in prison. So let's take a look here. Which curve is this? It's a market event, right? So we put a bunch of drug dealers in jail. So which curve is it going to affect? Well, obviously supply, because that's the sellers of the drugs. And which way is it going to shift? Well, supply is going to shift leftward because at each price, less is able to be made. So we shift to this new, still elastic, but shift to this new further left, higher prices, lower quantities. So our quantity has changed. It's gone down just a little bit, right? Quantity has just gone down a little bit. Price has gone up just a little bit. Our demand, of course, has stayed the same in this example since we've just been incarcerating people. So my question to you is, higher prices for illegal drugs. What does this encourage? Well, it encourages somebody who's thinking about entering the market as a seller to go ahead and hop in, right? If there's higher prices, there's more money to be made in this industry. So by having this policy of incarceration, we do achieve a goal of lowering the quantity demanded, right? Of lowering the amount of drugs that are bought and sold. But we may have this unintended consequence of increasing prices and leading people to sell even more drugs than before, right? This unintended consequences. So let's look at our other option, okay? Education. Education, we'll use blue over here, why not? Education's our other option, right? So another market event. What am I talking about? Education. That may not mean anything, just the word. Well, I'm talking about like DARE programs. You guys know the friendly lion that told you when you were a little kid, don't do drugs. Drugs aren't cool. So we're talking about programs like that. The government takes steps to encourage people not to use hard drugs, and not just education, but potentially even rehabilitation programs to get people to find ways to not need drugs in their life. So we look at this market for illegal drugs, right? So it's going to shift demand. These kind of DARE programs and stuff like this that encourages people not to do drugs, it's going to shift demand, and it's going to shift it leftward, right? So we get a leftward shift in demand. So we move from our original equilibrium quantity here to a new equilibrium quantity here. Another shift in quantity, right? A decrease in quantity. Interestingly enough, though, look at our prices. Our prices have not gone up in this example. They've fallen. We've moved this way to this new equilibrium, right? Moving this way to this new equilibrium. So quantity sold has fallen and price has fallen. So I would argue this may be our better strategy. Education may be our better strategy because we don't have this unintended consequence of increased prices that could cause some kind of feedback loop where there's more money to be made and then they take more people off the street and then there's even more money to be paid. So that's my argument, but obviously you see that in both situations quantity sold goes down, so our overall goal of decreasing how much illegal drugs is being sold is achieved, right? But I think this is a great example of why elasticity matters and why we should spend time on it. You can find more about elasticities in chapter 5 of Mankiw's text, and I've also got a link to a more mathematical look at elasticities in the description below. So yeah, elasticities, there you go.